The Vorkai war sage stepped onto the bridge of the captured human vessel and immediately knew something was wrong. Not wrong with the ship, wrong with her. She could feel it the moment she crossed the threshold. A vibration, low and wrongful, moving through the deck plates in a frequency that had no business existing. She held very still and let her secondary brain process it while her primary brain cataloged the bridge. Banks of instruments no Vorkai hand had designed. Lighting that was too warm to be efficient, a smell of something brewed and dark. The human's hot liquid ritual, still sitting in its ceramic vessel on the command console and still warm. Whoever had been here had left quickly. The war sage's name was Vreth On, and she had not survived 4 campaigns by ignoring things that had no business existing. "Secure the corridor," she told her 2 strikekin, and they went without question. She remained on the bridge alone, which was exactly where she wanted to be. The vibration deepened. She pressed one long finger against the nearest console. Not to operate it, just to feel. And her secondary brain delivered its analysis with the calm efficiency she had spent 60 years cultivating. 2 resonant fields, overlapping. One native to this vessel, one foreign, and the foreign field was embedded so thoroughly inside the first that they had begun to share. Harmonics. She had never seen that before. In 60 years of war and 17 ship captures, she had never seen that before. "That's funny," said a voice behind her. "Neither have I." The human was sitting on the floor with his back against the far console, long legs stretched out in front of him, arms draped across his knees in a posture of such complete ease that Vrethon's hand went to her sidearm, before she even processed what she was seeing. He had been there before she entered. The sensors had not flagged him. He was looking at her with an expression she could only categorize as interested. He was perhaps 40 years of the human standard, lean and angular, wearing what she recognized as a civilian maintenance uniform, dull gray, scuffed at the elbows. And he had a streak of something dark across one cheekbone that might have been grease or might have been dried blood. He made no move for any weapon. He appeared, if she was reading the human indicators correctly, to be in a good mood. "You're a war sage," he said. "3rd tier, the eye markings." He tilted his head at her. "Do you actually see better with those? Or is that just the mythology talking?" Vrethon kept her hand on her sidearm. "You will identify yourself." "Callum Reyes," he said. "Engineer, 2nd grade, ICV Resolute." He gestured vaguely at the bridge around him. "Well, former engineer. Resolute sort of stopped being resolute about 6 hours ago." He seemed to find something about that faintly amusing, a brief compression at one corner of his mouth that she had seen humans make in circumstances where there was nothing obviously funny. "You are the last crew member aboard." "Am I?" He considered this. "Yeah, probably. I was down in the relay bay when it happened. By the time I got back up there wasn't much point joining the others." He looked at her directly, without aggression, without the fear shimmer she had come to expect from human prisoners. "You feel that? The resonance?" She did not answer. "Because it's getting worse," he said. He rose in a single unhurried movement, dusting his hands on his thighs. "And I think we have maybe 40 minutes before that becomes a problem for both of us." The Vorkai did not negotiate with occupied prisoners. That was doctrine, old doctrine, the kind that had outlasted the generals who wrote it and would probably outlast the war. Vreth On had never found doctrine particularly useful, which was one of several reasons she was 3rd tier rather than 4th, and probably never would be 4th. "Explain," she said. He seemed pleased to be asked. He crossed to the secondary console. She tracked him with her sidearm the entire way, and he either did not notice or did not care, and pulled up a set of readings on the display. His hands moved with the particular economy she associated with humans who had done a task so many times they had stopped thinking about it. "When your boarding clamp engaged," he said. "It hit us at the exact moment we were cycling the fold drive." "You know what a fold drive is?" "I am aware of the technology." "Then you know it's fundamentally a resonance engine, and your clamp, Vorkai fabrication, very well made. By the way, he paused, apparently sincerely, as though this was a genuine compliment he felt needed acknowledging. Your clamp has its own resonance frequency for the lock anchor. And when those two frequencies overlapped, they didn't cancel each other out. They merged. He brought up a second display alongside the first. Two waveforms visually distinct but sharing a peak. Those are the resonance fields, he said. One is your ship, one is mine. They're entangled now. He glanced at her. You felt it when you stepped onto the bridge. She had. She did not say so. What happens in 40 minutes, she said. He scratched the side of his jaw with one knuckle, a gesture she had learned to associate with humans who were thinking about how to phrase something that was either complicated or bad. You know when two notes are just slightly off from each other, like almost the same pitch but not quite? A dissonance. A growing dissonance. The two fields are close enough to interfere, but different enough that they're fighting each other, and the fight is getting louder. In about 40 minutes, they hit a peak interference frequency, and then... He spread his hands briefly. Every system on both ships trips every safety cutoff simultaneously. Every one. Drive cores, environmental, weapons, all of it. Vrethon considered what that would mean for a vessel powered by a sustained antimatter reaction. That would destroy both ships, she said. That would destroy this whole sector of space, he corrected mildly. The antimatter release, the fold drive echo, the resonance backlash. Yeah, I've been sitting here running the numbers. He nodded at the floor where he'd been sitting, and she noticed for the first time the rows of hand-drawn calculations covering the deckplate around the base of the console, scratched there with what appeared to be a bit of tool casing. She looked at the calculations. They were dense. She could not follow all of them. That was unusual. You have been working on this, she said. Since about an hour before you got here. He glanced at the hand-drawn figures with something like fondness. I do my best thinking on the floor. You can spread out more. She called off her strikekin. That was not doctrine either. She told them to hold the corridor and wait for her signal, and when one of them sent back a query tone, she simply did not respond, which they knew from experience meant she was done taking questions. She could feel Callum Reyes watching her when she turned back to the bridge, and she noted, not for the first time, his failure to behave in any of the expected ways. He was not trying to escape. He was not trying to bargain for his crew, who were presumably in the holding bay below. He was not making the posturing displays humans use to manage fear. He appeared to be waiting for her, in the same way she had seen humans wait at the beginning of a conversation they expected to be interesting. What do you need? She said. He lit up. There was no better description for it. Something in his face simply activated. He turned to the console and began bringing up a new set of displays. Okay, so the two fields are entangled because they're sharing a peak. What we need to do is shift one field's frequency so that they stop sharing the peak. Pull them apart just enough that they decouple. Decoupling will cause a resonance break, she said. It will discharge both fields simultaneously. He looked at her with an expression she recognized, after a moment, as the one humans wore when someone said something they had been afraid no one would notice. It was a look that involved the eyebrows and had something in it that was adjacent to relief. You got there fast, he said. Yeah, it will. And the discharge, if it happens in an uncontrolled way, is basically the same as what happens in 40 minutes. So, he spread his hands. We need to discharge it in a controlled way. Define controlled. We route it. He pulled up a schematic, the Resolute's internal architecture, and traced a path through it with his finger. Instead of both fields discharging outward, we create a channel between them. We make the discharge happen along the channel, and we ground it here. His finger stopped at a section of the ship she recognized as the cargo anchor array, where the Vorkai clamp is attached. She understood once the clamp would absorb the discharge. It's built for resonance loads. Your metallurgy is excellent. He said it again with that strange sincerity, the kind that made her wonder if he was mocking her, and then, looking at his face, deciding he probably was not. The clamp takes the discharge. Both fields decouple cleanly. The resonance goes away, and your ship's fold drive. Fried, he said. We're not going anywhere. A beat. But we're also not dead, so. Vrethon moved to the console beside him and studied the schematic. The routing he had described required access to her ship's clamp controls, which were not designed to be operated from a captured vessel. It also required someone on her ship making specific adjustments to the clamp's anchor matrix, adjustments that would need to be timed to within a few seconds of the routing procedure on this side. "You cannot do this alone," she said. "Nope." He looked at her steadily. "I need about 20 minutes to set up the routing array on this end. While I'm doing that, I need someone on your ship adjusting the clamp's resonance dampeners in this specific sequence." He offered her a scrap of the same material he'd been writing calculations on, covered in a precise series of numbers and timing marks, and then when I signal, I need them to hold those dampeners open while I trigger the discharge. She looked at the sequence. It was intricate, and it was right. She looked at it for a long time. "You had no way of knowing a Vorkai war sage would board this vessel," she said. "I did not," he agreed. "This sequence requires knowledge of Vorkai clamp architecture that is classified." "It does," he said. "How?" He thought about it. "I've been an engineer for 22 years. I've taken apart most things. I haven't taken apart a Vorkai boarding clamp in person, but I've studied the resonance frequencies of 9 different ships that had marks from 1. And frequencies tell you a lot about structure." He paused. "Also, your people leave the same torque signature at every joint. Very distinctive, like a fingerprint." Vrethon looked at the sequence again. She looked at the human standing beside her, who had spent an hour alone on a captured and dying ship doing mathematics on the floor, who had correctly analyzed a phenomenon she had never seen before in 60 years of war, who had devised a solution that required him to trust his enemy and her to trust him, and who was looking at her now with an expression she could only describe as hopeful in a very practical sense, the way someone looked when they had prepared for every contingency they could prepare for and were now waiting to see if the world cooperated. She activated her comm. "Vrethon to Shrike. I need Engineer Tol Anik at the boarding clamp interface. Stand by for my transmission." She looked at Callum Reyes. 20 minutes. His face did the thing again, the activating thing, and he turned to the console. It took 19. He moved through the routing procedure with the same economical precision she'd watched him apply to the initial diagnostics, but faster now, with a focus that had stripped away everything else. The slightly amused ease, the conversational side comments, all of it. What remained was only the work and a kind of tunnel-narrowed concentration she recognized because she had felt it herself in the minutes before an engagement, when everything outside the immediate necessity simply ceased to matter. She relayed instructions to Tol Anik in terse, precise fragments. The engineer on her ship was good. She confirmed each step before moving to the next, which was protocol, and the protocol annoyed Reyes only once, briefly, when a timing window almost closed before Tol Anik finished confirming. "Tell her to confirm after," he said, without looking up. Vrethon told her. The vibration in the deck had been growing, a climbing harmonic that Vrethon could feel in her jaw now as well as her feet. The displays showed the 2 resonance fields converging. 3 minutes to the discharge window, he said. Tol Anik needs to be holding all 4 dampeners open in 30 seconds. She is holding them. Good, okay. He straightened. He looked at the display showing the 2 waveforms, the gap between them narrowing. When I trigger the routing, you're going to feel it. It's going to feel like the whole ship is shaking. I have felt ships shake. Not like this. He said it without drama, just as a fact. Then he looked at the scrap of paper in his hand, the same calculations from the floor, and looked at the display, and looked at the scrap of paper again. Something moved across his face, that she found she could read after a moment, not because she knew human expressions particularly well, but because she had seen the same thing in her own strike-kin at certain moments. It was the look of someone who had checked their numbers as many times as numbers could be checked, and now had to trust them. He pressed the trigger. The ship shook. He had been right that she had not felt anything like it, not a mechanical shock, not a weapon's impact, but a resonance quake, the vessel's entire frame thrumming at once. The displays went white. She heard Tol Anek's voice from the comm, flat and professional, holding, and then it was over, not gradually, at once, like a sound cut off mid-note. The vibration was gone, the displays cleared, showing both resonance fields clean and separate. She heard a loud, definitive clunk from the direction of the boarding clamp. The discharge, absorbed, done. Callum Reyes exhaled in a long, slow descent from whatever height he'd been at. There it is, he said quietly, not triumphant, something quieter than that. The particular human settling that came when something terrible had been prevented, which was different from the celebration of something good being achieved. She stood in the silence of the bridge for a moment. The fold drive, she said. Fried, he confirmed. Like I said, he looked at the relevant readout, and something in his expression acknowledged that this was real and this was permanent, and then he moved past it. Your clamp will need replacing. The matrix will have taken some damage, but structurally the Shrike should be fine. She studied him. You knew, when you devised this, that you would lose the drive. Yeah. And your crew is in our holding bay. Yeah. You still chose to solve it this way. He looked at her with a kind of patient steadiness. There was about 40 minutes between me finishing the calculation and you showing up. I could have. He stopped, rephrased. There were other options. None of them worked out better for anyone. Vrethon regarded him for a long time. War sages, in the Vorkai tradition, were authorized to make determinations. That was what distinguished them from commanders, who followed protocol, and from officers who interpreted it. War sages made determinations and lived with them, and no one asked them to account for the logic unless the logic failed. I will release your crew, she said. He blinked. The Resolute cannot travel. Your crew is not a useful prisoner population for a vessel that must now manage clamp repairs. I will release them to the nearest neutral rayless relay station. She paused. You will remain aboard the Shrike until I can confirm that the resonance discharge has not caused delayed structural effects. He appeared to absorb this, as a prisoner, as a material witness to a technical incident. She picked up her comm. It is a distinction that exists in Vorkai law. It is sometimes useful. Something crossed his face again, not the activating thing, something quieter, more considered. He nodded. Okay, he said. He looked around the bridge of the Resolute one last time, at the warm lights and the cold ceramic cup and the calculations scratched into the deck plate beside the console, and she saw him make some interior accounting of all of it. Can I bring my tools? She had, in 60 years and 17 captured ships, never been asked that before. Yes, she said. The crossing to the Shrike took 4 minutes through the boarding tube. He walked with his kit bag over one shoulder and looked at the Vorkai hull material with the same expression she had watched him turn on the resonance displays, interested, cataloging, the face of someone who found the actual texture of the world endlessly worth examining. Tol Anek met them at the far end. She was a small Vorkai engineer with precise secondary eye markings denoting 20 years of service, and she looked at the human the way most of her species looked at humans, which was with a suspension of judgment that was not quite comfortable and not quite hostile, and would not resolve into either until it was given. Reason two, Callum Reyes looked at her. The dampeners, he said. When it hit, you held them open. Tol Anek glanced at Vrethon, then back. It is my function. It wasn't easy, he said, with the deck shaking like that. That wasn't easy. Tol Anek was quiet for a moment. No, she said. It was not. He nodded at her once, the human acknowledgement that carried no implication of hierarchy, only regard. Then he followed Vrethon into the Shrike. She brought him to the inspection bay, the room designated for material witness protocols that had been used perhaps twice in her career. He set his bag down and looked at the unfamiliar space with equanimity, as though he had expected to end up somewhere like this and had made his peace with it before arrival. She stood in the doorway. "Your crew will reach the relay station in 18 hours, she said. "Thank you." He said it simply, the way the word was presumably meant, not as performance, not as tactic. She looked at him. She had a question that was not doctrine and not relevant to any formal assessment, and that she would therefore not ask. She almost asked it anyway. "You didn't know I would cooperate," she said instead. "When you proposed the solution, you had no reason to believe a Vorkai Warsage would." "No," he said. "I didn't know. Then I had a solution that worked," he said. "The question of whether the person in front of me would cooperate with a solution that works." He paused. He turned the tool casing over in his hand, the one he'd used to write on the floor, the one he was now using as a habit object the way she'd seen soldiers use smooth stones. "I generally find it worth asking." She held that thought. She turned it over the way he was turning the casing. "You remembered the torque signature of the clamp," she said, "from 9 ships. Years ago. Some things," he said, "are worth remembering." She went back through the door and sealed the inspection bay and stood in the corridor for a moment while the Shrike moved away from the wreck of the Resolute, and the stars through the corridor viewport were indifferent and old. She had made a determination. She would live with it. In the inspection bay, if her internal sensors were reading correctly, the human sat back down on the floor with his kit bag and his calculations and his tools, and began, presumably, to find out what else was worth knowing.